Welcome to the 100 Rural Women podcast. I'm your host, Teresa Kittridge, founder of 100 Rural Women, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to creating connections and inspiring leadership. We see a future where more women are in positions of leadership, and we are set out to interview 100 amazing women doing important work that really has big impact in rural America. I'm excited to introduce you to our guest today, Nevada Littlewolf. Nevada is the executive director of Women Winning, which you're going to learn more about. So everybody, welcome Nevada to the podcast. Welcome, Nevada.
Thank you.
We're glad to have you here with us and have this conversation. We like to start out the podcast with a fairly informal question, and just have a nice conversation. And the question we have is can you share a lesson that you learned from, your grandmother, older influential woman in your life? Any kind of lesson that you could share that you've kept with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would think about both of my grandmothers. I have my grandmother Littlewolf, who actually both of my grandmothers are Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe citizen members, and my grandma Littlewolf, raised my aunts and uncles in Hibbing, Minnesota, on the Iron Range. My grandfather was a miner in the iron mines, and my grandmother was a stay-at-home mom who took care of all of the children, 13 of them. And I just think I know that there was like at one point, the Hibbing Tribune did this news article about her and how she would cook for her family. And she was able to describe like all of these ingredients that, she would use to make bread or make the food. And like it just, like a different kind of day and age around like how do you care for your family and how do you prepare meals. And I just think of her meals as being like really healthy and nutritious and homemade and like totally different than the way we eat, I think, today. But also that she was just like such a great caregiver for her family. And then my grandma, my grandma Otto, who her maiden name was Fairbanks, had a farm in Deer River, Minnesota. So, I can just remember being at the farm and like my grandma making chicken dumpling soup and like really hearing about like, the farming practice that she had when she was raising her 6 children, my mom included in that. And, how they had goats and how they had different things, different animals and different food that they were growing. And I just think both of my grandmothers being like Indigenous women and raising their families and taking care of their families. And like always as a child, like those were home bases for us as grandma's house, either grandma's house in Deer River or grandma's house in Hibbing, both rural communities, both really formative for me as a person.
I would be remiss also to share when I think about meeting Nevada. I've known Nevada since we started 100 Rural Women when it was just an idea out there. And I just want to thank you for all your support as 100 Rural Women has. What a wild 5 years it's been. I mean, we've had such a tumultuous world, but it's been such an amazing experience. And I think probably the coolest thing for me with 100 Rural Women is getting to know you and getting to know amazing women like you. I know you just talked about your grandmas a little bit, but what about you? What about your connection to rural?
Sure. I mean, it really, in a lot of ways, stems from my grandmother's, right? I am a citizen of Leech Lake Nation, which is located in northern Minnesota. I have spent most of my life in the whole region of northern Minnesota and mostly on the Iron Range of Minnesota, like I said, where my grandma Little Wolf lived. And I was living in Virginia, Minnesota, and served on the Virginia, Minnesota City Council for 10 years. And I had gone to high school there, I'd gone to community college there. I raised my children there. Really, I would say what I call like the heart of the Iron Range being the Queen City of Virginia. And I think rural community has always just been like really important to me. I think it really is connected for me to um the fact that that's like my ancestral land as an Anishinaabe woman, like northern Minnesota is in fact where my ancestors have been and have come from, and we have such a strong connection to that place. And I would say more than just like the community itself, which the community rural communities are really incredible, But I think there's more, it's more than that because to me, it feels like it's a spiritual connection to the land, the water, the woods, like the whole everything about it. Yeah, and I think that most of my life, my adult life, I've really done a lot of work in rural community to um think about how do we lift up rural women. So you had mentioned when we started connecting around 100 rural women. At that time, I was working on a project called Rural and American Indigenous Leadership, which was really an organization and a project that we developed to think about rural women's leadership, but really bringing in the cultural assets of Anishinaabe and Indigenous women to like help inform how could we actually have stronger uh, women's leadership and particularly political leadership because when I ran for city council, back in 2000, I guess it was 2006, 2007, I just didn't see any Indigenous women running for office outside of tribal communities. But within tribal communities, I think every tribal nation in the state of Minnesota has seen a woman be the tribal chairperson, which is equivalent to basically the presidency of the tribe, right? When you can see that within your tribal nation that indigenous women are leading politically and that's a norm, like that's not questioned at all. It just is a part of our cultural fabric. But then you go into like sort of mainstream community and you don't see it. Like it's just it's a hard thing and it's a strange thing, honestly. And I think that I had to get to a point to say like, no, I am a leader. I believe in this. This is where my values are at, and I'm going to run for office in the city council, even though I'd never seen a Native woman ever do that before. I shouldn't say I'd never seen a Native woman do that before because I had seen, of course, Winona LaDuke run for vice presidency, which was she was a huge influence on my life and she ran the Indigenous Women's Network when I was a teenager. I had the privilege of being a part of that work and, going to the Indigenous women's gatherings and meeting with other Indigenous women. But again, I think that a lot of that really came from a cultural perspective, and it wasn't, again, mainstream culture that was supporting that. It was really more, I think, from us as Native women to like understand like where we stood in terms of our ability to be leaders and our impact on our communities and our roles in that. So, again, going into, like, a city council position, I served for 10 years. 8 of the 10 years, I was the only woman, I was the youngest person, I was the only person with school-age children, and, it was an important place for me to be. I was important for the community that I was there so that there was voice and representation, that was missing, and certainly, I think for rural communities and having like rural resiliency, like we really do need to have that diversity of perspective. We need to have like creativity. My schooling, my formal education is I have a bachelor of fine arts and I gone to art school and I know that the work that I do is really more political and it's more like leadership based, like working with leaders and like helping to advance community leadership and political leadership within kind of an anti-racist practice and within like an intersectional approach. But really, I mean, the formal training that I've had really is in the arts. And I think that having that arts background has helped me quite a bit in terms of being able to think more creatively about solutions and to see solutions that maybe other people don't see. So yeah, it's been really fun to be in a rural community. And of course, rural women that are leaders, we find each other. I mean, we found each other pretty quickly because across at least my region of the state, there was one woman on the Ely City Council, one woman on the Babbitt City Council, one woman on the Evelyn City Council, one woman on the Duluth City Council. So it was like, you find we're all kind of we at that time I feel like we were all kind of in the same boat where we ran, we won, we were serving, but we didn't see a lot of support within our own government entity or like leadership entity. So we would have to find each other in other ways and then help support each other through networking. And I think, again, across Minnesota, I started to develop really strong networks with rural women across the state and then eventually to continue to build and develop those relationships across the entire country.
Absolutely. You've done so many incredible things. I don't even know where to start because I I think it would be great for you to talk a little bit about, you know, some of the amazing things you've done in your career also. So, I know you went to ended up going to the Humphrey School, and that took you so many different directions. Can you talk about that a little bit about, sort of that education side, but that whole career growth piece too?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really proud to say, I mean, like, when I think about the education piece, when I was in high school, I went to what's now known as the Purpose Center for the Arts, the statewide arts high school. So I actually left the Iron Range to move to the Metro, in Golden Valley to, like, pursue my dream and my passion, around the arts and, like, move away from home and live in a dormitory and, kind of start this kind of schooling pretty early. I mean, I was 15 when I applied and was 16 when I started school there and moved away from home. And then I got through that year of schooling, and then I just made a decision for myself that I wanted to go back to the Iron Range for my senior year of high school and graduate with the people who I had grown up with and, like, in my community in rural. And I didn't necessarily want to go back to the high school, so I actually started at Masabi College in
Mm.
post-secondary options. So my senior year of high school was really my first year of college. It was really great to be in rural community with, just there's just a very different feeling about being in a rural community and the people and, it's like your friends and their parents and the other people in community that you've worked with or done things with in school or in, your summer jobs or different things like that, that small towns really come together, especially I think for young people and celebrate young people's success. So I was really happy to, return to Virginia to graduate from high school, start college. I went to community college. I got my AA degree. I actually then transferred to UMD in Duluth with that AA degree to, like, get my Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. And I never left Virginia. I actually commuted from Virginia to Duluth for school. And then it took me um, a while to finish that because I started when I was in, like, my 20s, and then I had children, and so I made a decision to, like, put a pause on that, and I didn't go back to school until I was in my late 30s, and I got my BFA when I was, just I think a little over like 40, 41. And so it took me a little bit longer, to get that degree and then eventually start at the Humphrey. But in between that time, I was raising my children and I was doing a lot of youth organizing. I was trained in Chicago on how to be a community organizer. I was doing a lot of national work around lobbying out in DC around education, particularly Indian education. I led this youth program that was two different youth programs. One I helped found and start, which was a summer youth program for kids who lived in Pine Mill Court, which was the housing projects that I grew up in. And then the other was called Circling to Seventh Generation, which was an American Indian youth program. And, I think about, like, doing that work now and I don't know. I mean, I was so young and I don't really think about it. I just was like, there's a need in our community. Kids need something to be engaged in. Native kids really need more support around them. We need to be connected to our cultural community, but we also need to be connected to the community at large. And we need to know how to impact change and social change for ourselves because we knew nobody was going to do that for us. And so I think in my younger years, I just had done so much around, like, community organizing and youth organizing. And eventually, I ended up working for the 6th Judicial District to be an advocate for youth who had been abused and neglected. And I did that for about 10 years. That was really hard work. Eventually, I mean, I kind of got to the point of, like, feeling pretty burnt out on it. And, the old analogy about, taking the babies out of the river, it's like, well, how are they getting in the river in the first place? Like, we have to go upstream and find out who's putting these babies in the river. And for me, that was, again, like, I feel like I had done a lot of work when I was younger around traveling to DC, doing lobbying, understanding that there's a political element to social justice and social change. And so I kind of went back to that and was like, I need to um I mean, that's when I really was like, I think I'm gonna run for office, but I also need to think about public policy and how can I have an impact on public policy that will help create situations where families aren't struggling, And by and large, what I would see in all of the cases that I had, hundreds of court cases that I worked on over 10 years of time. It was all about mental health, chemical dependency, economic access, and access to services, right? Like people can get mental health services, people can get healthcare services, all of those things. So like those themes were kind of like generational trauma, right? Like those things were consistent, like just felt like these are things I think we can solve for, right? And I think within the school systems, like how children are treated and how they are protected or supported, these are things we can solve for as long as we can develop really good public policy and create supports for children and families. So I think that's where my shift kind of went, like I left that work. I made a decision to like leave that work and then go more into leadership myself to run for office and then to help support other leaders that shared values with me.
I did not know. That's what I love about the podcast. I'd learned so much about people, and that really sort of shows me how your pathway, all these different connects since I've known you, the different things and amazing organizations that you've led and are leading now. So when you think about your life, your career, what are some of the more significant things or things that, were most rewarding for you?
I feel like I've gotten to do a lot of really, really incredible and amazing things. And I think my younger self might not have been able to imagine some of the things that I've been able to do, which is it's just really interesting. I think of some of the kids that I was working with in the youth program and I see them now as adults. It's like it's so amazing to see where they're at in their lives. I know when I was on the city council, I was a part of a national organization called the Young Elected Officials Network, and through that, I was able to get connected with all of these other under 35 years old elected officials that was, state level, local level, federal level, and, progressive leaders. And we were invited to the White House and we got to meet President Obama. And during Obama's presidency, I got to go there, I think 3 or 4 different times, like, one time for the reception where we met him, another time for breakfast with Karen Diver, who is a special counsel to him, another time just for, like, a policy briefing, and I feel like there maybe was one other time that I got to go to the White House, but it was, like, really, such an incredible time, I think, to be in DC, and then, of course, with President Obama, who's been one of, I think, one the most transformational presidents we've ever had. I just like that sort of sometimes gives me goosebumps and chills to think about what an incredible thing to be a part of and like also a part of this like national group of young leaders. And I see those leaders now and they're doing all kinds of things as well. I think we all kind of keep an eye on each other and we are all still kind of connected, but it's pretty amazing just to be a part of that. And probably in more recent years, I really feel like I I love that I got to work for Justice Alan Page. He was, leading this statewide effort to create a civil right for all children to have access to quality public education. Considering like I had really gotten my start in policy around education, like it kind of felt like a full circle to come back later in life to do this policy work with somebody who I admire so much. I mean, of course, he was like an NFL superstar, but he was the first Black Chief Justice in Minnesota, and then, of course, his work with the Page Education Foundation and his deep and just powerful commitment to education and children. And to be around somebody like him who is he's just an incredible, incredible human being. I mean, Justice Page, he's just a very powerful person. And I think like, but he's also very humble and his commitment to children and education is really, it's just truly amazing. And I think that what we were trying to do in terms of get on the ballot basically to amend the state constitution and we really our ultimate goal was to create the civil right for children. It was like I had never done anything like that before. Like I'd never worked on a statewide policy. I'd never worked to like change our constitution, through the amendment process. And while we were not successful, there were a lot of really great relationships developed. There was a lot of really great learning for me in terms of understanding how the process works and how you have to get it through the legislature and get the legislature to agree to put it on the ballot, and once you get it on the ballot, then the voters can vote on it. And so I just think there was a lot of just professional development that I had during that time and really great relationships that were developed. And then, of course, just to get to work with somebody who is iconic. I mean, that, and, Justice Page and I remain friends. And that's one of those things is like when I was a kid, would I ever have imagined that I could say Alan Page was going to be my friend one day? Like, probably didn't think that was going to happen, but it has. And it's pretty incredible.
And that sort of takes us into another part of the conversation I'd like to have is, and you do, it's, we all sort of weave through our life and it's amazing how it all connects. But when you were young, did you have a good sense of what you wanted to do? Did you ever think you'd be doing what you're doing today and hanging out with Justice Page? All those wonderful things.
I knew from I feel like from a pretty young age that I really wanted to be an artist and to be doing work in the creative field. And obviously that's what I did in high school and then that's what I did in college. But I will say that as I got older and was like a teenager and in early 20s, it became clear to me from a pretty young age that as an Anishinaabe woman and an Indigenous person, as a member of a tribal nation, that we are the most legislated people in this country because we have tribal law, we have local law, state law, federal law, and we also experience like the worst disparities. And so if you care about yourself, you care about your family, you care about your community, there kind of isn't really a way, at least for me, and then probably also for my cultural teachings, is like there really isn't a way for me to just only think about, oh, I'm going to be an artist and create art. I think that from a young age, like I said, I started this youth program when I was a youth myself. We received the Governor's Award for Excellence for that program. I never thought I would be recognized by the governor when I was 16, 17, 18 years old, right? We just did it because it felt like there was a need in the community. And I think that's kind of where the evolution of my life has kind of gone is like where do I see the needs and where do I feel like I can be of good service in the values that I have. And of course, like that I said, started with youth organizing and then working with kids and children that were in my community, whether that was the community of Pine Mill Court or the American Indian youth that were a part of our bigger community that we served when we had Circling to Seventh Generation. I think that advocacy and that kind of work I think it just kind of comes naturally to me in a way that I feel like I have to be like I can't just be out here for myself, I guess. And I have while I'm a practicing artist here in my home where I paint and I still engage in like art practice and I go and support artists and I care very much about the creative community. I know that the bulk of my work now, like I said, is in community development and political leadership. And I actually don't think that those things are like totally separate from each other.
Absolutely. I think it is. It takes sometimes a very creative approach, especially on that political side and just with the work you're doing now with women winning. Talk about that a little bit because I think that's another place that is hard work. It's such important work. And that whole creative side, I think really, really comes into play with the work that you do. So tell everybody a little bit about women winning.
I first was introduced to women winning again back in like 2007 when I ran for office and I reached out to them to get an endorsement and they endorse pro-choice women for public office and they endorse at the local level, the state level, and the federal level, and they work within the boundaries of Minnesota and the 11 sovereign nations within the boundaries of Minnesota. So I think that was my first entry point into being a part of the women winning community. I was an endorsed candidate. I ran for office 3 times, served for 10 years. The entire time that I served, I was a women winning endorsed candidate. They supported me every time. So it comes with this credibility in the cloud of like earning that endorsement because you have to earn it. It's not just given. And then secondly, they also provided a little bit of financial support. And for me, that meant the world. My campaigns were not super expensive, but I did have to raise all of the money to make sure that I had a successful campaign, and they were really helpful in that. Later, when I moved to the Twin Cities and started my program at the Humphrey, where I'm a Master of Public Affairs graduate student, I was looking for something like in terms of work balance, work school balance, and Women Winning was hiring for a political director. And so I went to work for Women Winning as their political director in 2019 and 2020. Of course, 2020 was when the world shut down with the pandemic. And so my portfolio of candidates that I was working with, we had to move pretty quickly from traditional political campaigns into socially distanced pandemic campaigns, right? So there were not going to be any parades or pancake breakfasts, right? It was all going to be over Zoom and socially distanced. And that's like a very for political campaigns to have to make it was a drastic shift in terms of how we do the work. But Women Winning was really ready and equipped to help make those adjustments and help our candidates figure out how to do that and still win. I actually think that our candidates were really adept at managing that shift and that change, and we had a lot of success that year in terms of wins, and I'm really proud of the women that did that work that year. I'm really proud of the work that I was able to do with them. And then later in that year, I was recruited by the Biden campaign to become Minnesota's state political director for Biden Harris. So I took a leave of absence from Women Winning to do that. And like honestly, that was the first time I had run a statewide program. Also, it was the first time I had worked on a presidential campaign. And to me, that was also a calling that uh, it was like a spiritual calling for me to do that work that I knew that once I was asked to do it, that I could not say no, that I needed to be there and I needed to help now President Biden, win that election. And then when I started, Kamala Harris wasn't on the ticket yet, but once she got on the ticket, I was thrilled. I was so thrilled that she was selected as the vice president. I'd been a big fan of hers for a long time. And yeah, and that work again, running a socially distanced pandemic, a political campaign against someone who is really, kind of a terrible person. And it was kind of surreal. Sometimes when I think about it now, I'm like, how did any of that even happen? How were we managing through all of that and doing all the work that we were doing? But we brought home the win for Minnesota and that campaign, and then of course Biden won nationally. I was planning on going back to Women Winning because, like I said, I was on a leave of absence. But that's when Justice Page reached out and recruited me to work with him on the Page Amendment. And again, it's kind of one of those things where like, yeah, you don't get to say no to Justice Page, right? Like I there was no way in my mind I could, decline that. So I worked for Justice Page for 2 years, and in 2022, as we all know, the Dobbs decision was handed down and, Roe fell. And while many of us who have done work in reproductive rights, health, and justice knew that was coming given the way the Supreme Court was being stacked up. I mean, we had seen that the memo had been leaked probably 6 months earlier, so we knew that we did. We all knew it was gonna happen, but I still think the day that it happened, it still felt like this huge gut punch, right? It was still just like, how does my daughter have less rights than I grew up with, that I lived with my entire life? Like, how is that happening right now? And kind of in that moment, I knew that I had to get back into work with both women's political leadership, but also at the intersection of reproductive rights, health, and justice. And so I think Dobbs' decision happened on Thursday. My daughter and I went to Target. We made signs. We went down to the courthouse. We were standing out there with these signs. And I was just like, this is not enough. Like, this is just like, this is the only thing I can do right now, but this is not enough. And I know that this is not the thing that I need to be doing. On Monday, 4 days later, Women Winning had their annual luncheon. I, of course, had a ticket to it. I, support the organization, have supported the organization. Went to the luncheon and just had women there saying, Nevada, we really think you should apply to be the executive director. Women Winning is still looking for an executive director. And I just started that conversation and a few months later was hired to be the executive director. So I've now been with Women Winning in this leadership role since November of 2022, almost 4 years. And it's a work of love. It's a work of calling. And in this moment that we're in with all of these things that have been happening, I actually can't imagine any better work that I could be doing than this work.
Yeah, I hear you for sure. And is so important, and I know that you're so committed and you have such a busy life. You've got busy life with family, busy life with work, the busy life with community engagement. What do you do? Well, how do you sort of recharge? What do you do for fun, and what do you do for self-care? How do you take care of yourself?
It's a really, really great and important question. And I just have to say that how I might have answered this question 5 years ago is not the same way that I can answer it today. I think we have been through some of the most difficult things anybody should have to go through in a short period of time in 5 years, right? We had the pandemic, we had the murder of George Floyd, we have like that catalyzed here in Minneapolis a global racial reckoning. We had, the first election of Donald Trump, the second election of Donald Trump. We saw Dobbs' decision in the fall of Roe. I would say obviously with the second election of Donald Trump, there's just been this like the rhetoric is very intensified. We're seeing a political polarization like, you know, no other time in history. We're in an age of social media and artificial intelligence. There's so many things that are happening that are kind of just like all in this moment that make for a very, very difficult time, especially for people who are doing this type of work. And I don't want it all to be sold as doom and gloom because I think there's also a lot of really inspiring work that's happening. So, for my self care, I really try to focus on those inspiring stories, those inspiring leaders to really make sure that we are supporting each other and that we are helping to uplift each other and that we're checking in on each other and that we have these strong networks and that we know those real in-person live networks with each other are the things that are real and that it isn't sort of this imaginary, world of like social media or other things, right? Like I think we have to remind each other that we're human and we're here for each other. This past year especially has been really hard, and obviously we just came off of the one-year anniversary of the assassination of Speaker Emeriti Melissa Hortman, and last summer when that happened, is just like the before and after, it's just life is never the same now after that has happened. And, I actually last summer, I intentionally sought out trauma therapist and a woman who is an Indigenous practitioner and just made sure that I was actually engaging in a therapy practice that was going to be meaningful for me, but also trying to figure out other ways to help keep my mind, my body, my spirit all healthy. And I think that it is about engaging in a mental health practice, but also are there physical practices that I need to do? And so I find myself doing more of stretching activities or somatic activities. I find myself taking like salt baths. I find myself intentionally scheduling in with a massage therapist or the sauna and cold plunge, trying to think of ways to like really make sure that I still have a mind body connection that I can just make sure that I'm taking care of myself in all ways, right? And I do think this work is like a lot of it is in front of screens. We're doing right now, right? We're on a video screen. We're not in a room together. We're looking at screens all day long, and I think that also is a part of self care that we have to be really mindful of. And I think, thank goodness, in Minneapolis we have so many parks and beautiful outdoor nature spaces. I live near the river, obviously in the rural communities of Minnesota, there's so many just beautiful, amazing, gorgeous healing spaces across Minnesota. And I think I always just encourage people to get outside and touch the grass and touch the water and hug a tree. I don't know, just to be able to have that connection in nature, I think is very it's very healing and it's very important. So those are some of the things that I have done. But I think in terms of what do I like to do for fun, I mean, I have to admit this last year, I've gone to a lot of Minnesota Timberwolves basketball games. Of course, the season's over now, but I was really thrilled that they brought back Kevin Garnett as a ambassador. And I'm the same age as Kevin Garnett. When he was 19 years old and drafted into the NBA and into the Timberwolves, I was 19 years old. And so I just like distinctly remember that and feeling a really strong connection to him as a basketball player. And I followed his career and even when he left Minnesota and went to the Celtics, right? Like I think that this past year I'd really not spent a lot of time going to professional games in that kind of way. But my kids and I really enjoyed this past season and, going to games and watching them in the playoffs, and it just kinda gets my brain away from like, it puts my brain into somewhere else, right? Like, I'm not doing political work. I can the other thing I can do at, like, a professional sports game that's totally socially acceptable and nobody's gonna, like, judge you for it, is you can yell really loud and,
Right.
like, get it out, right? Like, so you can cheer your team on and nobody's gonna judge you for it. They're gonna actually be like, "Yeah, we're gonna do that too," right? And I think there is something probably cathartic about being able to just yell out and release sort of the tensions and the things that you have inside of you. So that's what I've been doing. And yeah, and now I've been kind of shifting more into the Minnesota Lynx, which is the women's basketball. And they're just incredibly talented. And I think that we're really lucky to have, some really great sports teams in Minnesota. And that's been fun.
And in that vein, what are you reading, watching, listening to?
Yeah, again, this will tell you a little bit about myself, Teresa, that you probably don't know, but I love comic books and I love toy collecting.
Ah,
And I've been reading Absolute Batman. That has been a really great book that has come out recently. And then I also go to these toy swaps that happen here in the Twin Cities called the Minnesota Toy Posse. So you can find new toys and old toys, like vintage toys and collectibles. And that's really fun for me. It's pretty nerdy, really, but it is one of the things that I really enjoy, kind of more on the fun side. And then I think I have kind of a stack of books that I'm looking at getting into for the summer, and one is Chain of Ideas by Ibram X. Kendi. That's his new book. It's about kind of the rise of authoritarian age, and so I think there will be some good I heard him speak recently, at Westminster Church, and it was incredible, and I think there will be a lot of good insights in that book. I also had picked up recently My Own Devices by Dessa, because I had gone to see Dessa play at the Dakota Club, and she's incredible, great artist, love her music. A book that I often go back to is All About Love by Bell Hooks. I think it's a book that just helps to keep me grounded in, like, why do I do this work? Because it is a work of love, and I think we do have to be reminded of that because, again, it would be easy to be like, I can't do this anymore, but if you can be reminded of why you do it and who you do it for and how you do it, like, I think it's that's a great book. And the other probably mentioned right now is, Robin Wall Kimmerer, who, of course, is writing Sweetgrass and Serviceberry. She's just she writes about the connection to plants and the world, and I really appreciate the way that she makes those connections, and it speaks to me in a way that kinda makes sense to me.
yeah. In Braiding Sweetgrass, we read that in our book group, and I did the YA edition, and I liked that book a lot. And I know we talked about this a little bit, and this is what I love about you. You're positive, you're looking forward. How do you stay positive? And what gives you hope for the future?
I think it's thinking about Robin Wall Kimmerer or others like Sean Sherman, the Indigenous chef that's doing such great work on food sovereignty and Indigenous food movement. I think about Indigenous futurism, right? To me, is about retaining our cultural values and our teachings and our knowledge while also understanding the world that we're living in now, and then how can that future really be the future that we want it to be? How can we design it to be the future that we want it to be? I think that that's really inspiring to me. I think it's because it gives you again that ability to be a creative thinker, and it gives you the ability to think about a future that maybe has never existed before, to think about designing things in new ways. And certainly in the work that we do around public policy and political leadership and kind of getting into these seats of power, if you will. Most of us, like women and women of color, Indigenous women, trans, non binary, we're pretty clear. We know that these systems were not built for us, set up by us. They weren't designed with us in mind, right? If anything, they were designed to keep us out or to harm us. I get inspired about this concept of Indigenous futurism because it really gives you the freedom to just vision and imagine what would it look like if we all were just eating really healthy food and had a connection to our food and our food systems. What would it be like if we had access to our language and our culture in a way that it was highly accessible? And when I think about reproductive justice, that's the framework that we use at Women Winning. It's really about women and birthing people having the right to make the decision to have children or not have children, which includes access to abortion health care, right? And if and when a person decides to have children, a birthing person decides to have children, that they have the ability to raise their children in a safe and healthy community and environment. So, those kinds of bigger, broader, more visionary ways of thinking are the way that helps me kind of move forward. Because if I can imagine that future where women and birthing people have all of those things, it's just like, I think our whole communities are lifted, right? Everybody benefits from that. And then it's kind of like, okay, how do we get there, right? How do we move towards that beautiful future that we're wanting to see? So I would say that that's a lot what keeps me thinking from a positive, and it really connects into the whole concept of 7 generations, and that's something that I've grown up understanding since I was quite young about 7 generations and the generations that come before me and the generations that come after me, and then the generation that I'm in right now and the impact that I have. So I don't know. I mean, I think that keeps me pretty positive.
Yeah, that's an amazing way to think about that too. That vision and then thinking how can we get there and what does that look like? So it keeps your brain that's your creative side too that comes out to figure that out. And when you think about women, a lot of your work has revolved around working with women. What do you think we can do to better support rural women in particular, but all women?
I mean, I can just share this. When I was living in northern Minnesota, I think that there were such incredible, great things about living in northern Minnesota, living in a rural community, just beautiful things. And then I think there are also some things that feel pretty isolating as a rural woman, especially if you're a leader and that isn't highly supported, right, across communities or supported in the same kinds of ways. And I think about the amount of racism that I experienced throughout my life. And a lot of it is kind of, it kind of flies under the radar where it's just like, well, that's not what really happened, or what you experienced, that's not really true. Or, it's kind of almost like gaslighting, right? Like it's hard, it can be a really hard space to live in. And um, I know that the work that I have led around rural women, especially because, Liz Johnson and I were really working so hard on rural women's leadership since we first met each other, and doing not just work here in Minnesota, but nationally to connect rural women together. And it really is based on that idea that rural women are just tenacious, they're powerful, they're smart, they actually know how to get things done in their community. And at the same time, they can feel very isolated. They can feel like they're marginalized. They can feel like they're getting gaslit. There are all these things around not having the ability to be connected in a network. And I feel really proud of the work I've done over my career around rural women's leadership. I know that it's why you and I are such good friends, and that like we just stay connected no matter what, because we care about this, right? And so when I think about how do we better support rural women, we actually built it into our women winning strategy when we were doing strategic planning back in 2024, because there was data from the Humphrey that really shows that women's political leadership in Minnesota has not reached, gender parity. However, if you look at the Twin Cities and sort of the metro area and you disaggregate the data, the Twin Cities and the metro area has actually gotten very close to parity. I mean, it's not
Hmm.
there, but it's very close. And even with women of color and Indigenous women, very close, right? There's been a lot of work that's been done in the Twin Cities, the suburbs, and I would even say larger hub cities across the state where women are doing better than they have, especially back from when I first ran back in like 2007. So we know there's been progress, but as soon as you add in greater Minnesota back into that data, all of those statistics go way down, right? And the rural communities across the state are really the opportunity areas for us to elect more women to public office and to get those voices in those seats of decision making. And so we as an organization have really decided that we want to do more to support rural women, and we want to get more young rural women into our Forward Fellows program. We want to get more recruitment done around local offices to see more women running for school board, county commission, city council, mayors, and also state house and state senate, right? I think we just want to be out there cultivating and supporting women that decide that they want to run for political office. And I really do think the way that we do that is a collective action, and that we do it as a community and as a network. And we do have tools now. Like I said, the technology can be hard and all of that, but also there's some great things about it that help us stay connected. And of course, you're doing this incredible work with 100 Rural Women and these podcasts, and I think that these are really powerful tools to keep us very connected and engaged with each other, and help us understand where we can help support each other. Like, who's doing what are they doing, where are they at? I think the support is we have to get out there and be in community with each other, and we have to continue to do things like this.
Yeah, and I think too, you and I have talked about this where with 100 Rural Women, right after we launched, COVID hit not too long after that. So we had to shift our whole model and be virtual. But, we've talked too, it's like we've had broader reach because of that. And the whole idea with this podcast is to build on what we learned from all this engagement over the last 5 years, is that women learned from other women's journeys. So that's why it's so incredible that we have you with today, because it's just one of those things where if a young woman could say, "Oh, that's how she did that? Oh, oh, maybe I could do that." So it's sort of that whole modeling piece. And I always like to wrap with this question, and I really have appreciated your time today. And tell me a little bit about what advice, this is, of course, me, I always have to have two-parter questions, but what advice would you give your younger self? And what advice would you give a young woman trying to navigate in rural?
I think for my younger self, and it might be the same thing that I would say to other young rural women, but it's like really like trust yourself and stay connected to people and things that give you a spark, because that's kind of where your pathway is going to be lit, right? If you're in spaces where you don't feel like you're energized, or you're around people that aren't helping you kind of light your own fire, that's probably the wrong way. That's a wrong turn. Like, turn around and go down a different path, because I think that there are people everywhere that really want to help, that care about the same things that you care about, and want to help be a part of your journey, and want to lift up the same things that you want to lift up. And yeah, and I do think that that takes trust. I also know I just went to one of my best friends from high school. Well, all of us this year are turning 50. I'm turning 50 in July. I'm one of the last ones, but I've just seen all of my friends going through their 50th birthdays this year. And so I was just at one of my friend's 50th birthday parties. And, she was like, we should really be proud and excited that we made it to 50. Like, it's really incredible. And we were also reflecting on, we had these photographs from when we were in high school, and she kind of made this photo collage thing. And we were kind of reflecting upon like what kind of self-esteem that we had when we were younger, in the 1990s, and like what the world was like then. But I think it's an interesting thing how we as women, and especially young women, have to navigate so much, and there isn't necessarily a lot supporting us in the way that we're navigating. And I do think it takes a lot of trust, like self-trust, to say, this doesn't feel right. I have to do something different, or this doesn't sound right. I am going to do something different, or I'm going to call somebody out. Not call them out, but be like, that doesn't sound right to me. I'm not agreeing with that. So yeah, trust yourself, stay connected to people that give you a spark. That's my advice.
I love the spark piece, because it is, you need that. You need that positive reinforcement and people that give you energy. Well, thanks so much, Nevada. I appreciated your time today, and thanks for sharing your story. And I just know that our listeners are going to love hearing about you and learning about all the amazing things you've done. So thanks so much.
Yeah, miigwech. Thank you.